Okay, I think we are at 4:30. Um, and I know that Deb, before we can begin, was going to do a roll call so that we have it on the record who is with us. I don't know if Deb, if you just want to do that quickly.
Of course. Thank you, Dr. Kilburn. If you could just say you're here when I say your name, that'd be great. Mr. Boucher?
Here.
Mr. Stewart?
Here.
Mrs. Anderson?
Here.
Mrs. Corbin?
Here.
Mrs. Irvin? Not here. Mrs. Falvo?
Here.
Mrs. Hartman?
Here.
Mr. Moore?
Here.
Mr. Nelson?
Here.
Mr. Nicotera? Oh, I can't hear Mr. Nicotera.
On mute. He was here.
He's muted.
Here.
There he is. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. Dr. Porcelli
Here.
and Mr. Salerno.
Here.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. The only one not here is Mrs. Irvin.
I do want to bring to your attention before we begin that you may want your camera off, and that is fine. You may have your camera off and not realize it. So just might want to take a check to see if your cameras are on, if you intend for them to be on. And that would be in the lower left-hand portion of your Zoom screen. All right, Mr. Boucher.
Okay, with no further ado, we will call the meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Outstanding.
I'm going to have to get a little flag in here,
No, I know it.
glued to the wall.
Yeah, I don't want to tell anybody. There's no flag in my that I can see in my sight, so I'm faking it. Okay, but the intentions are there. So, all right. Well, welcome everybody. I hope everybody is well and healthy. Before we get going tonight, before we get going with recognition of visitors and what have you, Charlene Hartman asked if she could have just a moment to speak to everybody. So, Charlene, the floor is yours.
Wow, that's wonderful. The floor is mine. Well, a few of you I have already spoken to about this, but some of the other board members, I have not had an opportunity to say anything. I have made a decision that I would like to retire from the BOCES board at this time. I just realized I'm up for re-election, and that would mean another 3 years, and nobody's going to believe it because I'm so young looking, but I'm going to be 80 in 3 years. So I just think for my own district, this is a best decision that I have made. This will give West Verlan a chance to get somebody on board. They can run for election, however that works out. I don't know the politics of the whole thing. I have spoken with Rocco, and we both agree that Heather Johnson will be a good choice for the West Verlan board. I think that this gives him a chance to work with her. And I feel personally that when you don't sit on a board, you kind of lose touch with your own board. So I just think that sitting on a board is always a helpful thing. And we know Shirley Birch always said that that's the way it should be. You should be on a board. I've enjoyed this. Some really wonderful people on the BOCES board. And we're so fortunate, our administration and all our board members. I feel bad I'm not going to have much interaction with Tony, but I'm going to keep watching what everybody is doing on the board. If I hear anything, I'm sure Steve will hear from me, or Trish. I just, I know I'm doing the right thing, and I know all of you. Children are always the most important thing in your minds, and I just want all 12 boards to work together as they always have. And be patient. and helpful to Heather. I've told her little stories about all of you, so so anyways, that being said, it's just been a privilege to be on the BOCES board and to work with everyone on there. Scott needs to let me know what I got to do with this Zoom so I can get it off my laptop.
We can take care of that, Charlene. No problem.
Can I just delete it?
Yes, you can.
I can just delete it. So again, thank you, everyone. I'm going to stay on for the rest of the meeting. Again, thank you, everyone, for working with me.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Charlene. You know, there's not enough words that could be said about, you know, how valuable your contributions have been over the years. It was interesting when I was talking to you the other day. I think you said you started serving on the local school board. Did you say 1979?
Yes, I did. 1979.
So you've certainly paid your dues and put in your time, and we wish you nothing but the best, and we appreciate you. And if anybody else would like to say anything, I want to get out of their way, but I appreciate you for sure.
Thank you, Steve.
Charlene, get a report. I appreciate your counsel, your presence, your wisdom, and all the good comments we had about bookworms. Say hello to Robert for me.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Can I say something, please?
Sure.
I know it's not, normally don't say anything in a board meeting, but Mrs. Hartman, it's been a pleasure. You've made my work here very pleasant, and I appreciate all that you have done for me.
Well, Deb, thank you for bailing me out when I make mistakes.
My pleasure.
Effort.
Charlene, if it's Michelle, your co-pilot over there when we were sitting in person, I just want to tell you thank you for kind of taking me in and teaching me all the things that I kind of needed to know coming into this wonderful group of people. And I definitely will miss your wisdom and your historical perspectives on things. And hopefully we'll run into each other since we're slightly neighbors. And best of luck.
Michelle, thank you so much. And I know that Shirley is watching over you, and she's so proud of all that you're doing.
Thanks.
She really is. And to Russ, I just want to say, let's get somebody in there to say the pledge the proper way.
Oh.
That was cute, Charlene. Yes, and thank you for everything, with all your contributions to the board. You'll be on until the end of June, correct?
No, I'm going to be, I don't know how that can happen, but I think that hopefully Heather can jump right in March, but I don't know how legal all that is, but I don't see any reason why she can't, unless there is some reason. Trish, is there a reason that Heather can't start right out?
Yeah, I think I'll check on it, Charlene. I think there might be a procedure where they still would have to be elected or appointed in some way in a temporary position and then to be elected in future as the term expires. So I think there might be a way that someone can complete someone else's term, but there should be a process for that. And then there's usually another process for electing into a term once it's new. So I will follow up on that to learn more and make sure that we can try to provide as seamless a transition as possible.
I just thank you, Trish, and I just
You're
think
welcome.
it would, I think it will be neater if that can work out that way. So thank you again, everyone.
Well, it's hard to say goodbye on a Zoom meeting.
No.
I mean, I guess
Well,
I guess I'm going to give you a Zoom hug.
Well, thank you, Russ. It's probably easier for me because if I was in person, this would be very difficult. So, so we'll all give each other a hug, and that I'm going to be thinking of everybody, and hopefully someday we can have a little luncheon or something together.
Yeah,
that would be great. That would be wonderful.
Charlene?
Yes, John.
Charlene?
Yeah, I'm listening.
I'm gonna miss you, honey.
Well, You know, John, I'm gonna miss
Well,
you.
time friend.
Heather will keep you up on what Rocco's doing.
Wish you a lot of luck.
Thank you.
Whatever you do. Very, very nice. Nice. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. So, Dr. Kilburn, shall we move forward here or on our, and we'll go on to recognition. We have no recognition. We do not have visitors today, I believe. And communication from the floor, correspondence. So I guess we're moving right on to the district superintendent's report. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So let's head there. You're on.
Okay, so I just want to make sure people can hear me. As we know, I'm having microphone issues, so, okay, that's wonderful. So today, we're going to just have a conversation with the board to bring you full circle on some things that are currently going on regarding the state executive budget. So what is finances what are they looking like for the schools? How does that correlate, and what is our tentative budget? I'll speak to that a little bit. Going into the regional priorities selected by the board, and then how do we work with the school districts to support them with their needs and how they line up with our priorities, and then also how we may or may not be in alignment with the state with these same priorities. So with that being said, and without further ado, I'm going to begin. And if at any time my microphone is not working, please tell me and I'll hold it like that if I need to. So I want to talk to you about the executive budget, just to make a few key points. So the schools in January get their state aid runs. So they get information from the governor about what he anticipates providing for schools in the form of state aid. And it is not looking very pretty. So I had done a presentation to the board previously where we talked about the difficult financial circumstances schools are finding themselves in. So I'll just highlight a few things. In terms of state aid, the state has given money into the schools and backfilled it with federal funds, which happened last year, and they've done it again, right? So the governor's coming out and saying, schools have gotten more state aid. And when our local schools get their reports from the state education department, it looks like they're getting the same amount of funding that they've gotten for the past 3 years. But we know that that's not really true because the New York State money has been reduced and filled with federal money. And that's happened again. But there's been something a little more insidious done also. In addition to taking out state money and replacing it with federal money, the governor has taken STAR reimbursements and put them into state aid. Now that's a problem because schools, as you know, get money from two sources. They get it from the state and they get it from tax payments. So when they get their money from tax payments, most of that's paid by individual taxpayers, and the rest comes from our STAR reimbursements because many of us receive STAR credits. Now what the state has done is said, well, see that STAR reimbursement? We're going to take it out of your revenue here and put it over here and say we're giving you more state aid, which is ridiculous, right? So they've done that, and it gets more complicated because in addition to taking New York State funds, replacing it with federal money, replacing it with STAR money, which means the districts get less money over here, then they're taking out what's called a local funding adjustment. So they're actually putting in a reducer, subtracting a chunk of money out and saying, see, you're about the same on state aid. When in fact, the budgets are getting gutted on schools and state aid is not coming from the state very much at all. So that's been a key theme of legislative advocacy among the cabinet, among the superintendents. And they've met with Assemblyman Benedetto, who's in charge of the Assembly's Committee on Education. They've met with Assemblywoman Buttonshaw. Today they met with Joe Griffo, and they are planning a meeting with Senate Education Committee Chair Shelley Mayer. So schools across the state are talking about these shifting of funds within state aid. It's a very complicated shell game, and it's dangerous. Now, as you might remember from last year and probably the past 3 years, the governor tries to take BOCES aid and other expense-driven aids and compile them together. He does it every year. He's done it again this year, but it's worse than what he's proposed in the past because he's taken transportation aid, which is huge for schools, and lumped it in with BOCES aid, high-cost special education aid, lumped it in with BOCES aid, along with several other expense-driven aids. He's taken categorical aids, which are for textbooks and software and hardware, and lumped it into expense-driven aid, capped it off, and plunked it into the budgets. So in essence, it gets rid of expense-driven aids. It gets rid of all of it. The districts will get a fixed amount, and that's all you get, no matter how much you spend each year. Now imagine what the cost of a school bus is. Imagine what the cost of some high needs special education services are, right? So if you have children who have to go, let's say, to like School of the Blind or School of the Deaf, that's expensive. Think about having to make decisions between sending children to career and technical education or buying a school bus. Now that's bad, but there's a reducer in there. So every year that will actually become a smaller pot for schools. Now that in itself is pretty tricky, but the governor's proposed budget also puts limits on claim reimbursements. So every year school districts have like these windows of time where they submit claims for reimbursement. And the governor has said that any prior year claims, they're just not going to reimburse now, just not going to do it. And that any future year claims have a new deadline, which I think is by November, which doesn't line up for schools. Transportation aid that school districts spent last year and this year on COVID-related busing and transportation will be reimbursed, which was good because at first it wasn't going to be. However, they are not covering standby fees. Now, this is a problem for schools. If you recall, last March, the governor shut down schools every 2 weeks. So he'd shut down the schools and say, all the schools in the state are not open. And 2 weeks later, I'll get back to you. So every 2 weeks, schools had to wait to find out, are we open or closed? So they couldn't lay off the bus drivers for 2 weeks because what if they needed them to drive buses? And those are called standby costs. And schools across the state have incurred those, and those are not on the docket to be reimbursed. And then there's school food programs, and that actually is level or has some increases. And to note, because I know it's special to this group and to the BOCES, there are being added for the local food program. Remember, we talked about that last year where you're buying locally and you get additional reimbursement on school lunches. So there's been, I think, 10 million, something like that, set aside in the state to help increase that for schools, which is something positive. So that's the executive budget. And you can begin to see the picture that our local school districts are facing. And for some of you who are on local boards right now, you're probably hearing all about this in your meetings at that level. So setting the tone that way, I'm going to now turn things over to Tom Dorr to talk about the BOCES budget. Tom, you're muted.
Very unlikely to be muted. This budget cycle has been pretty interesting. Again, I just want to take you back a little bit. The board sets parameters for us to start building a tentative budget. And we usually get together. It's a fairly internal process. We don't have a great amount of communication with our districts at that point because we usually have a fairly good historic perspective as far as what services might be from year to year. And we have, it's a fairly constant thing. If anything, what happened in COVID is that was certainly not the case. We don't know really what the district's needs are going to be. I mean, we tried to hold things tight. I mean, we worked very much on the unit cost. And again, remember our budget is really two things. We can control the price of a service, whether it be a tuition or some other basis. We control that, and the districts control the volume at that price. So it's a little bit of a dance. And again, we've always kind of built the budget based on a fairly good understanding of what was going on. In this COVID environment, it's been very difficult to kind of project what's going to happen. I know, talking to superintendents, they are just under the gun. I mean, there's constant pressures to open. There are constant pressures to stay closed. They're just, they're pretty much scrambling, just trying to keep things status quo as best they can. So long story short, it's difficult to project what we're doing. So we work very hard to fix costs. Our unit costs are, for the most part, flat. You'll see a lot of zeros if you look at the tentative budget, which is in your packet and starts on page 60. Well, it's back in the 69, I think page it starts on. Most of the unit costs are flat. To be perfectly honest with you, the extensions of those, which means the usage on the part of the districts, it is a bit of a crapshoot, for lack of a better term. You'll see some things in there that are big dollar items, and Chris Hill will talk to it. For instance, the virtual academy, it's a big dollar figure. I don't think we know at this point if it's going to continue. A lot of it's contingent upon COVID, where we are going forward. If there's still, God forbid, some resistance to be in schools come September, there'll be some call for it, but that might be the case. That line could very well go to zero, as opposed to, maybe even getting larger. Really, really tough to project. So, and just to echo what Dr. Kilburn said about the state budget, not that 21-22 looks all that great, but the other thing that I heard that she didn't mention was the governor also, when he projected his budget for 21-22, is already counting on $6 billion from the federal government. I mean, that money is already accounted for in the projection. So between that and the $3.8 billion that he's backfilling from the money that's already was approved in the federal budget, the second CARES Act in November, there's $9 billion of federal money in the education budget that we certainly don't think will be there in 22-23. So we'll work very closely with the districts at this point. Again, the tentative budget, what that really does, it drives what we call the request for services, which are now ready to go. They're going to go out to the districts this week, and that will really start the discussion, because that's going to force them to look at their budgets and decide, what services do we want next year? We're going to increase things, we're going to decrease things, and then we have a lot of discussion at that point as far as what their needs might be. So as I said, we're at that point. You'll adopt, if you will, you'll adopt the tentative budget tonight. The commitment forms are ready to go, and we have probably 2.5 to 3 months ahead of us to get the thing settled and really try to put a budget together going forward for 21-22.
Could I have a couple comments or question, Tom?
Absolutely.
The governor takes our CARES money then, I take it, for public schools, right? Because at the community college level, community colleges are doing well because they got the CARES money and they could spend it themselves as long as they indicated what they spent it for. So it's really too bad that we have to work with him. But as far as our unit cost is concerned, I know we don't make budget adjustments during the year, and I know that our superintendents understand that, but unit costs can change to some degree based on what the enrollment is. Has there been any discussion with them for any relief for them in any way, that way, if we see things happening?
Yeah, I've already had a couple districts, even for the current year, for 2021. More than normal. It's very, as you pointed out, Elaine, it's very rare for them to come back and do a negative adjustment based on, not so much on unit cost, but on their usage. A lot of times they let that money flow into a refund.
Right.
But as you probably realize, as you just pointed out, the districts have incurred quite a few additional costs this year related to the pandemic. And some of them are in danger of getting near or surpassing their overall budget. So a couple have already approached me and said, can we make an adjustment before year end? And basically the refund that they would normally get in October will be granted to them, whenever they want it. We've always had that arrangement. It's pretty unusual that they come to us in the spring and said, look, I'd really like to, I know that I signed up for 12 special ed kids, there's only 9. I'd like that money back now. We'll be happy to accommodate them in any way we can.
I just want to be sure that if they feel they can't use us as a bank, we're gonna
Absolutely.
help them out. And we need to let them know that we are there to help them. We're not there to make big profits, but we're there to do what's best for each district.
We have no interest in we'll hold their money if they don't want it back, if they don't ask for it back, and they'll get it in a refund in October.
Right,
But if they
right.
want it now, they can certainly have. We're not going to spend it.
Okay, good
Great.
enough.
Great question. Great point, Elaine.
That's where I'm at. And I think we're all kind of are at that point.
You were reading Russ's mind.
Well, Tom, I'd like to just add one point, just a clarification in terms of the overall budget process. The challenge this year, like many years, is we start our budget process in October, right? So we're forecasting the needs of our component school districts on historical rationale, as well as what we see as a snapshot in time in October. You know, Tom brought up the virtual academy. You know, you look in our budget book, that's a line of $1 million that in October was there, right? So it made sense for us in the proposed budget to leave it there so that schools had the opportunity to use it next year. Now, when we get those commitments back in May, chances are if the schools don't need it, that's going to be scrapped, right? So when we get those commitments back, that's when the actual budget gets reconciled. So we have ideas of what schools are going to do, but until we see those commitment forms and reconcile our actual budget, it's going to be interesting to see what transpires.
Now, Tom, we wouldn't through the year make budget adjustments. We'd keep doing business the way we are, and you would internally on your books make those adjustments.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, you can see the
I
budget.
mean, we're not going to be having budget changes through the year. We're going to operate the same way as the BOCES board.
I'm not sure. Well, the only thing that doesn't change, again, we've talked about this in the past, is the BOCES administrative budget is static. I mean, that's one thing that stays the same and cannot be adjusted at all.
Right.
The program budget changes constantly. It literally almost changes.
Okay. All right.
And it has quite a bit this year. I forget exactly what we started at, but yeah, I think there's an increase this year. Maybe not. And again, most of it's COVID related. Again, we keep talking about the virtual academy. There was nothing budgeted. When you think about it, it was October or through December of 2019. There was no such thing as a virtual academy at that point. And obviously, you know, during the fiscal year, once we started and we found the need, and Chris developed and Scott developed the virtual academy, you know, $1.5 million flowed in from the school districts. Of course, we adjusted our budget upwards to handle that.
I guess what I'm saying is we'll make adjustments, but we won't make amendments in the budget. As
No,
far
it's
as
always-
the budget's concerned, no, based on their needs, no. Okay.
So Tom, I have a question. So basically what I'm hearing is in the past, when business was usual, you might submit a $70 million a year budget and manage it right to the 70 million or very close to it by the end of the year. But in the times we're living in now, basically you might have to figure out a $75 million budget, knowing that it might come in 65. So there could be bigger gaps, but that's the reality we're living with. Is that what you're saying?
I think it's a little harder to predict. It's rare though that the program budget, we're very conservative when we put the program budgets together for tentative budget purposes. It almost always is somewhat larger, and we've seen it grow sometimes in double digits. I mean, you know, we'll estimate $73 million, and it'll be $80 million budget by the time we're done. A lot of that is, again, helping the districts manage their funds. It's historic that when the districts get near the end of their fiscal year, they realize, you know, what kind of shape they're in, and we always see usually always see an influx of technology purchases at that point. I mean, that always is, again, my whole history here is we'll have increases in our budget in April, May, and even as late as June to try to get some equipment for the following year that the districts will do. So we rarely try to manage the budget as the tentative budget it is, and the tentative budget is extremely conservative. And it has historic, even this year it's up over $1 million. You know, from,
Yeah, but it's conservative figuring the give back. the reimbursement. I mean, practically, we're doing a good job and we need to do the same kind of job, but be flexible for the districts.
Yep, I agree.
I don't know if this analogy makes sense, and it might sound silly, but when I was a component superintendent, I used to think of BOCES budgets a bit like egg yolks. The administrative budget is the yolk. It's kind of firm and it's set. It's got a solid shape and it's got to stay as it is. That's a lot. And it's like, that's how a component school district budget works. But the program budget is like the egg white. It kind of flows and lands and flexes as it needs to. And that's how the program budgets and the BOCES work, because they're responsive budgets to meet the needs of the districts. So if you need to think in pictures, think of an egg in a pan being fried, maybe not in the actual egg.
Okay.
And Steve, just one more point. If you look on page 42, we send these adjustments all the time, but even the current year's budget started out, the tentative budget was just north of $72 million, and the current budget is $82.5 million. So that's a $13 million increase, and in a very unusual year.
Yeah. Okay.
So now we move into, you know, as we're trying to kind of budget in advance of the schools and yet be responsive and also look ahead, we're going to turn things over to Chris Hill, and it's going to kind of bring you back to that idea of the lighthouse that we talked about in our retreat.
Right. So am I able to share my screen if we need to, or I can just talk to it? It's fine.
I don't know. Can you try?
Yeah, it says it's disabled for me.
Oh,
Try it
here.
now. Try it again, please.
Got it.
Oh, great. Awesome.
Okay, can everybody see this chart that I pulled up here?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we kind of worked on this chart. It's been, as Thomas kind of talked about earlier, as Thomas got led into, that it has been a little bit difficult this year in the planning because things are so dynamic. But we kind of worked on this chart to talk about the process that we're using. And it's kind of a process of identify, prepare, and respond, right? So if you look at the top columns, and I'll use my mouse to help highlight them, you know, we're identifying needs. You know, we have ongoing things, initiatives that we're working on currently, preparing a response, adding more initiatives. And then where we have that lighthouse, you know, that BOCES looking forward down this right-hand side are all possible BOCES services that we can provide to districts in a response to these needs. And it all really depends on when those commitments come in and when we talk to superintendents, what they actually need. So I'll kind of walk us through this table. I'm going to start on the left side and then I'll get a little bit more individualized. So if you look at the needs, we talk about what we've identified as district needs. Obviously, you know, the BOCES board has been very consistent with this. Like you guys, you have all identified this, the superintendents are identifying this, it's pretty consistent. Academic gaps. So obviously, because of this pandemic, we're seeing gaps between student achievement, gaps between student knowledge, and they're growing as time goes on. So, you know, that's a definite area that we're going to need to, we know we're going to need to address and help the districts address. Social emotional needs gaps are along the same line. So all of this time at home, you know, you've seen articles about mental health concerns, social emotional concerns, the isolation. We know that that's another area that we're going to have to address. The last two, equity gaps, right? So we see equity between students as becoming, through the pandemic, more and more of a problem. And that's equity around race, equity around support that they have at home, poverty, all sorts of equity issues that are going to need to be addressed. And then finally, we wish this one wasn't there, but we'll continue to need to respond to COVID, right? The rest of this year through the summer and possibly into next year, depending on what happens. So those are the areas of need that have been identified. I think this board clearly articulated those. So let's talk about what we're doing. So if you get into academic gaps, right? So already we're working with districts on after school programming and differentiated instruction. That's happening right now. You know, so to continue that forward, We're starting a PLC to work with component school districts. So PLC is a professional learning community. That means teachers from different districts come together. It's a facilitated discussion to talk about, okay, how can these after school tutoring catch-up sessions, how can we make them work better? How do we prioritize the learning? And then there's regional professional development in those areas in both this after school programming and the differentiated instruction. That's all going and building right now. Now, when you look at BOCES as a lighthouse, right, paving the way, looking for possible services in the future. Every year we run summer programs, right? We're preparing for those summer programs to be very amoeba-like, so we can shape them to meet the needs. Maybe they need to be virtual. Maybe they need to be in person. Maybe they need to be focused on K2 reading. Maybe they need to be focused on math. How do we customize them? Are they credit recovery at the high school? We have to be ready to provide anything that a district needs along those lines. They could be in PE, right? Districts could all of a sudden be saying, we need these kids to get some exercise now. They could be that way. We just have to be ready for it all. We have to have asynchronous options. We know that when kids get back to in-person, they're still going to need catch-up time. So asynchronous modules of work that they can do on their own to help supplement that catch-up. Gap identification is going to be huge, right? We have to be ready to help districts assess where students are, whether that's through software, traditional assessment, analyzing data. We have to be able to assess, to measure what that gap is and how far students have either fallen behind or where they currently are. And then differentiating the support to all different levels of support and differentiating. So those are some of the ideas that we have of possible services for the academic gaps. Now, when we get into the social emotional gaps, already we're planning, Mrs. Turner, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Turner to speak about this for a moment. We're planning a social emotional learning summit. Ms. Turner, you want to comment on that at all?
Sure. Yes, we are utilizing our professional learning committee, which has a representative from each one of your districts. And we regularly talk about professional learning and what should be occurring. So we are utilizing that group to help plan this social emotional summit in hopes of bringing together vendors, practitioners, all kinds of information about social emotional learning for the districts. And that even though we are calling it a summit and we will have a summit, it will be an ongoing project. So it won't be a one and done, which I'm not in favor of. So it is an ongoing process of bringing together as many resources as we can for our districts. And that was a direct request from our superintendents.
Yep, and actually Mrs. Turner led right into that next box, that regional coordination. By this summit not being a one and done, we'll continue to coordinate the regional efforts around social emotional learning in those gaps. Now, some of the possible programs, I listed the BOCES CTE summer camps up here. One of the things that we know kids need is connection, and they need it soon, right? So we're preparing to get all sorts of CTE camps ready to go in case, kids need that right away. We're going to have our itinerant services. We're looking at the schedules, how we can get social workers, psychologists out to districts more. One of the things that we do think districts are going to need are screening systems, ways to check in on kids when they come back and able to check in on their social emotional needs, have a way to measure that and detect it. And then after that, we have to develop the multi-tiered systems of support. So the multi-tiered systems of support are, when you look at what are on tier one, that first tier is, what are services that every child needs when it comes to social emotional learning, right? And then you get to your second level, what are some more targeted needs to specific groups of kids? And then you get to that third level, it's very intense, specific needs to individual kids to help them with these social emotional and mental health issues moving forward. So those are some of the areas that we're preparing for in social emotional, some of the programs that could be possible. Now we get into equity. You know, one of the travesties, or one of the most difficult things about what we're going through right now, is it's definitely exposing gaps, equity gaps between students. And you know, some of that is device and internet access. Like, we're really trying to make sure that that is not a barrier to kids. That's a current issue we're working on now. The other is support systems. What we're learning is that some of these gaps between students who have support systems and students who don't is creating a big problem. So we're really working hard to try to level as many supports for kids who need them as they can currently. So, you know, moving forward, we want to continue to acquire the technology that's needed for kids. We want to continue to customize supports to level the playing field as much as we can. But moving forward, we really have to look at a possible service is the ability to identify subgroup issues. So when we say subgroups, you know, when you look at data, you know, you look at data as the whole, and then you look at data for males, you look at data for different races, you look at data for students with disability, you look at data for all the different groups, students, English language learners. You want to have the ability to support districts in helping subgroups that have specific data trends. And again, that follows up with regional PD on how to meet those subgroups needs, how to get kids access, direct supports with interventions and instruction, ELL support. And again, a lot of this falls back to analyzing data, right? And really being able to pull out the data, working with all divisions on that. So those are some of the ideas we have, possible programs in equity. And then finally, we get to COVID response. You know, right now, we're in the process of continuing to think about the future of remote learning. You know, the virtual academy is a good example. The adjustments we've made with distance learning are a good example of virtual learning evolving, right? So that's going to continue to happen this year, and we're going to continue to look at next year. So what does it look like? What are possible COVID responses in this realm in the future? You know, synchronous remote instruction K-5, is that something that's going to always be an option? And I'll skip down to homeschooling. Will this become an option for homeschooling instead of? And asynchronous wise, curriculum platforms for in-person support and occasional hybrid. If we're coming in and out of school, will we need to bolster our BUZZ platforms so teachers can come in and out of school with a little more seamlessness, if you will, seamlessness coming back and forth. And will we need a coordinator of all this? You know, those are some of the services that we're thinking about and in the areas that we've talked about. I don't know if any of the senior council or wants to jump in on any of those, or if anybody has any questions about those.
Go ahead.
I would just ask if Chris, do you think you could stop sharing the screen so we
Yeah,
could
absolutely.
see each other? Great. Thanks. Wonderful.
So I just have a couple questions. Just in looking at the budget, like for example, on page 69, is this the right time to be asking these questions? Okay. So typically when we look at this, there's like the 12% or the 5%, and nothing too crazy kind of jumps out. But I feel like this year, looking at it, there are some increases or decreases that are beyond like 68% or 100. One of them's like 900%, you know, going in a positive direction. So like, just for example, so you have the College Works Foundation, the 206.04. I'm sorry, the one below that, the Options Middle School, that drops by 68.86%. Is there some sort of, so how do you conclude that these kids aren't needing that program anymore, or districts aren't using that program anymore?
So all the 206 coasters are ARC services. So any of those changes are based on what districts request. So that's not a service that we provide. We coordinate it and set it up and provide a conduit for the districts, but those are ARC services. So if there's a drop there, that would be the, districts saying that that's not something that they're going to purchase as much.
So do then those students get absorbed into another program? And would we see that?
Yeah, I mean, so some of the ARC programs are also duplicated by us internally. So typically that would be the case. I mean, with Options Middle School, the one you're looking at, that could be, and I would have to look at it further, but that could be a district just pulling out of that program altogether. So that's a program that's located at Westmoreland Middle School, sponsored by the ARC. So it could be districts just aren't busing there or planning to bus there.
So is that like a COVID response and they go, we're not comfortable with the way the program's being run, and so we're pulling out of that, and then they're going to come back when things open back up? Have you heard anything?
Not on the 206, I haven't.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So then the other question is the page 70, where we're jumping our summer school driver's ed 900%. I just wonder, if budgets are tight, does that become a priority for schools? We're projecting that's an offering. That's quite a substantial jump.
Yeah, so that jump is if you look at the unit cost, so the cost of providing that service has not jumped at all, right? So we're a 0% increase. It costs the same. That is based on requests. So ironically, the demand for driver's ed has not gone down at all. We provide it now outside of our county as well as inside. And it seems every year we're scrambling to find teachers because more and more districts want it. And last year we did not offer it because we couldn't, right? By law, we couldn't because of the shutdown, but there has been no decrease in demand for driver's ed. If anything, it keeps going up.
I have a question, Chris. Does New Hartford participate in our driver's ed, or do they have their own?
I believe New Hartford has their own.
Okay, because there's a lot of commotion out here that parents are paying fees and all these kinds of things, and driver's ed is being taught differently, and they don't use the cars and all sort of stuff. So I don't know if it's happening around where you have your programs or not, but there's been so much changes in what's been done, so.
Ours is summer only. So ours is only in the summer, not during the school year.
Okay.
Chris?
Chris?
Yep.
Just to ask some more about Michelle's questions. We see this kind of thing every year where there's big drops. And I think those are the same programs than that show increase later on. Is that a trend you're seeing, or am I just imagining that?
Yeah, I mean, we see that all the time. I think Tom talked about a little bit at the beginning is that, when we're planning, there's the unit cost, which we can control, right? We set that, but the volume of the purchase services from the districts, it can start out as very low. We could see a predicted drop, and then all of a sudden it rises up. If you take 206 Options Middle School, all it takes is one district to hear about that program in November and say, you know what, we want in. And all of a sudden that number doubles. So we operate as a BOCES. One of the things I love about working at this BOCES is we operate in the way that we are very flexible. If you need it, we will make adjustments. We will add staff. We will do what we need to do to accommodate it. And it's not like that everywhere. Some it's you commit, what you commit is what you get. So yeah, you will see fluctuations in some of those areas. Absolutely. I'm not sure that it's a straight line, like it's always the ones that are low that goes up. Some of them, sometimes they don't even exist and they explode, like the Virtual Academy. But it's very fluid, very, very fluid.
Okay, and then just one more question. I feel like I should know some of this stuff being here for a little while, but I appreciate you entertaining me with my questions. The 610.01, the telephone interconnect. as a sitting board member, and I see that exponential growth of 293%, I'm just curious, what does that mean? What is that covering?
What that translates into is when we went remote in March, right? School districts needed a way to find internet for their students and staff.
Mhm.
So from March on until March into October, I think we've purchased close to 4,000 Verizon Wi-Fi devices.
Hmm.
And that's the coaster that we sell them to the schools with.
Okay.
So that's the exponential growth and being able to try to solve those technology problems for students and staff.
Okay.
And again, that's one next year where you might see go right back to zero.
Yeah. Okay.
Right,
All right.
based
Thank
on,
you.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm all set. Thank you.
Chris?
Yep.
Yeah, sincerely, I want to thank the administrative team for taking a good look at those 4 areas. Very, very much appreciated, I'm sure by all of us. In regard to the social emotional, and I know we've been talking about this for quite some times, that sometimes BOCES and the districts cannot do it all, you know, and to continue to build those partnerships within the community. As a board, we talked about that many years ago in regards to the Nashville program. And I still believe that is the way to go is to build that as much as possible. But I didn't see that or talked about that in the social emotional piece. What are we doing there, if anything?
Yeah, so the community partnerships and the community schools COSER, and that is a major area of research and effort for us right now. So I've been working with the superintendents on a needs assessment, trying to identify the lanes of support and partnerships that we need to build. So we're talking about wraparound services for children right now. We're talking about drug and alcohol counseling. We're talking about telehealth and telepsychiatry. Excuse me, I was a little slow with that one. So this is early, right? So those are the areas that we're looking at and starting to have conversations with organizations that provide solutions in those. We've been talking to other BOCES. We saw a great presentation on telehealth systems in schools that can be run through that. You know, we've talked to agencies that provide the wraparound services. And right now, getting a lot of feedback from superintendents on where they need that focus to be.
Okay, and that's very much appreciated again, and I thank you for that type of research. But I know of 4 districts right now, you know, Dodgeville, Rome City, Little Falls, and Waterville have an opportunity to buy into a COSER this year, that we can get aid back on it next year. We think. So I'm just curious where all that is. And if this is not the time to talk about it, that's fine.
Yeah, so I think, and I can certainly share with the full board. When we first started entering these conversations about community schools and learned about it this year, and Krista is meeting with local agencies to start to try to see how to coordinate. It was with the expectation of building out for next year. So Russ was able to have a conversation with me yesterday where he was shared that those 4 districts might be able to run into some kind of funding to support them if we can establish a COSER for them this year. So that piece is still new, Russ, but we are going to look into that.
Okay. I mean, because, I can only talk on Waterville. I mean, that's a possible $120,000 grant that we can receive and to buy that COSER back and then receive aid back on it in the 21-22 budget, which would help immensely. So whatever you can do, to continue that conversation would be very gratefully appreciated.
So actually, it's interesting. I think you actually helped this segue because, Chris has done a wonderful job of trying to look at, what are the needs? And then, of course, what are we currently working on? How are we supporting it? And what is the potential forecast for the future? But we have to work, right, with our regional leaders to kind of figure out how do we get there? So I'm going to turn it over to the amazing Ann Turner.
Thank you. So yes, looking at that fourth column, that's a lot, right? Those are a lot of potential programs. It would require a lot of conversation with our districts. So how do we get that work done? And how would we work with the district and school administrators? And by that, I mean the superintendents, the assistant superintendents, the principals, to determine their needs in that area. So first of all, tomorrow afternoon, we have a superintendent's work session scheduled. And during that session, we'll have a discussion that includes breakout groups with questions to prompt their discussions in very much the same areas, because they are the same areas that the superintendents identified, that the board identified. So we're going to be fostering their discussions in breakout rooms. What do they need? Are there things that are already in that fourth column, or do we need to develop other things for them? Now, looking forward to the rest of the year and into the summer, the superintendents have a planning group for their professional learning, and we have met, and we are planning the institutes for over the summer for superintendents and principals. And the areas they identified to explore are similar, and they are professional learning around equity, professional learning around learning gaps. We know that it's going to be a huge issue, and they need to have discussions around identifying those gaps and then closing those gaps and how that's going to happen. I think you heard Chris already talk about differentiation and the differentiation of instruction and how we can support that for our students. So very much, a lot of the issues you identified are the same issues they're talking about. Additionally, for example, the assistant superintendents and my staff are about to begin a book study with regard to literacy and differentiation and reading and writing in the middle school and high school content areas, right? That goes to that piece of closing those learning gaps. So we're about to start that work, and that will spread throughout the principals throughout the year. And I suspect, Tom and Scott both mentioned this or will, we have, and I certainly meet with each of the superintendents with regard to the program and professional learning budget, but also to determine their needs or what they think they might be. So I have a good idea going into the next year what I might need to develop and what I might need to supplement. They probably are not far enough in their budgeting process to have that conversation with me. Usually I would be having it in February, but I think this year we will be having those conversations in March. So that will help to flush out budgets a little bit more and know what their commitments to us will be. Are there any questions about that?
No, Ann, and I think to your point, and Tom, I won't speak for you, but I know that our budget development presentations are extremely vital to provide information for our components, not only in what the services we currently offer, but to feel them out in terms of some of the things you heard earlier from Mr. Hill. You know, it's one thing to talk on the phone, it's another to meet in person and meet with their staff to get an understanding of what the needs that they might not know, right? And I know that's some of the concentration we've had here in IT over the past 10 years is getting into the schools, sitting down, going through budget commitments, talking about needs assessments, Obviously, this year is difficult with COVID, but we'll certainly do that during the month of March via Zoom and or in-person meetings where applicable. But I think to Ann's point, that tight communication and that relationship with our components is that vehicle for us to get them where they need to go.
And I just wanted to point out that, Scott's right. We spent a lot of time in the next few months with the superintendents and with the, not only with the superintendents, but also people that, at a different level than them. And we bring people at a different level than us. I mean, Michelle, when you were asking your question, you may have seen a little bit of hesitation on some of our parts. There's 100 coasters here, and the four of us don't have necessarily, even though we may have ultimate responsibility, we might not have the intimate knowledge of every single line that's in here, but I can assure you that our supervisors do. So, I mean, those supervisors will either go along with us when we meet with our component districts, or in many cases, they'll go out on their own. I mean, they're very competent. They know their programs far better than we do. And they're the ones that really put these budgets together. We compile them, we try to, guide them through the process. But it's more, it's very much the bailiwick of the, I hate to call them middle managers, but they're supervisors level that have intimate knowledge of these programs and can certainly communicate sometimes better than the senior council can with our component districts. So.
I have a question. Listening to our plans, we're meeting with the superintendents, and we're working budgets. For our immediate, like what I'll call crisis needs, the social emotional or the credit recovery or summer school, are we ready to execute like right away, like 3 months, 6 months now? Because if I were never served on a board before and I were listening to this, it sounds like we're doing a lot of good research and we're building a great plan that we can execute 2 years from now. I'm not saying you are, but I'm saying, are there, and maybe I missed it, but are there things that we can do immediately? Because it's almost as though, some of our districts, they're drowning victims. And I know we want to do it the right way, but I think if we measure twice or 3 times or 4 times or 5 times, they won't be there when we get there. So and I don't mean to sound negative. I just want to know, are there some like more immediate things we can pull the trigger on immediately to help districts, particularly in those urgent ones like the social emotional and the summer school recovery?
So, I'll speak a little bit to that, and I'm sure that Chris and Scott and Ann and Tom could add. I think you were able to witness that happen in real time with the virtual academy, right? So from the reopening segue where we realized the governor announced that we would have to accommodate people who chose to learn remotely, which wasn't like in the summer, it was toward the fall. We had weeks to turn that program around and on, and it didn't even exist. And that's where division integration has served us so well. So we were able to bring in technology, distance learning, our current teaching staff, Chris Hill and Ann Turner, and start developing a program immediately. When we looked at that table, that chart, that 4th column are a lot of things that we've done in the past or we have very close connections to already. So for example, when Chris was talking about the CTE camps, right, there might be a real need for that. That's something he definitely could deploy quickly because we've had to deploy that in the past. And when Ann talks about differentiating instruction, a lot of the professional development and the data, that's work that's been done in microcosms, right, that we currently support and know how to do. We might have to maximize it, and we can do that. We might have to hire more people to deploy. And there's other places where we can make great connections across with other BOCES or with the REC. So I have complete confidence that we'll be able to develop programs that are both short-term now, like urgent now, and longer term. But now that I've said that and now forced Chris to agree, let me ask Chris Hill what he thinks.
No, I think that, to put it very bluntly, we're just waiting for the go order, right? So all of what we're doing right now is building capacity to wait for a superintendent to say, or 2 superintendents, got to be 2, for them to say, we need this service, and then we move, right? So, we pride ourselves on the ability to, like last year, we customized summer school options in a week. They told them we need customized summer school options that prioritize math and reading, and boom, we did it in a week. The virtual academy was 3 weeks. From hey, can you do this, to hiring teachers was 3 weeks. So we can move pretty quickly. And right now we're very much in the capacity building stage but we're not going to deploy until we get the go order, because we don't want to spend money on something that people don't need, right? So we got to, it's a very much that just in time philosophy. If you go lean manufacturing or any of that lean stuff, right? Just in time. So we got to be ready for that.
Nice. Thank you.
So what we decided to do was to just kind of take, instead of having you listen to 4 different DS presentations, but to kind of bring them all together as one and have you participate throughout. So I appreciate that. And for what it's worth, those priorities that you addressed about academic gaps, social emotional gaps, equity, and responses to COVID were completely reiterated by the cabinet. The superintendents were like, these are, you know, as we're talking to them, these are the things we need. But they were also reiterated by the Commissioner of Education. We have a new Commissioner of Education, by the way. Betty Rosa is now the official commissioner. And also by the Chancellor. So they were recently speaking at a conference, I can't remember which one, and they spoke to those exact same issues. So for what that's worth in the BOCES, I think the board has a really good thumb on the pulse of what's going on out there and where the focus needs to be in terms of urgent needs and priorities for our districts. That's the end of my report.
All righty. All righty. Thank you very, very much. So now we're on to the rest of our agenda. We need an approval. We need a motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting from January 13th, 2021, and the approval of the minutes for the special meeting of January 20th, 2021. Can I get a motion? Moved by Mr. Salerno and second by
Michelle.
Michelle. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried.
Mr. Boucher, I have to vote present on the special meeting because I wasn't there.
Okay.
So I can't vote yes. It's a lesson I learned from Mr. Stewart.
All right. So Miss Kimball, do you have that? Deb, do you have that?
Yes, Mr. Boucher.
All right, perfect. All right, good. So
Thank you, Chair.
thank you. All right, we'll move on. We need approval. I need a motion to approve the consent agenda of B, C, and D for our consent agenda. Can I get a motion for that?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Falvo,
Second.
second by Mrs. Corbin. All right, thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none. Oh, there's a discussion. Go ahead, Debbie.
Talk about something that actually isn't on the consent agenda. Actually, I think there is one item we were going to talk about on it. But I was looking at the calendars and noticing the wellness meetings and the shared decision-making meetings are being put on hold. And I'm wondering if this is COVID related. We can't get together. The programs themselves just aren't functioning. I'm just kind of looking for an update on what's happening.
Sure.
Sure, I can chime in. So yeah, they're delayed. The shared decision-making wellness is all still going on. It's just very much a COVID-related shared decision-making and wellness. Like everything is really focused there. So the groups have been meeting, and we will get to you with the time to kind of report out. They're still going on. It's just so COVID dominant right now that, you know, typical things that we talk about in those committees are just have been put aside right now because all of that shared decision-making and all of that wellness is revolves around getting through this current crisis.
Well, I would think it's more active than ever since there's more things coming at you for wellness and shared decision-making. I'm hoping that's the case.
Yeah, it's very, 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 that work is very, very active, but almost in a reactive mode. You know what I mean?
Yes,
so
of course. Sure.
So normally those are very proactive committees looking at things for the future. And right now they're okay. What's the best way to get kids, you know, to do X, Y, and it's very COVID focused right now.
Okay, but I'm just kind of wondering what's the problem of reporting out on them?
I think it's just volume of what to report out. So we've just been delaying so when we bring it together that we have something substantive to report on.
I wonder.
So overwhelmed with what's going on that you can't put together a report or what? I'm still a little baffled.
So the original reports that we put together were not long enough. So we're going to put something together after, with a little more time. We have a little bit more to add in.
So that you're asking for time and to get your act together to be able to report out.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
That's fair. I do wonder too, I think there might be some great connections with SDM and wellness when we start to come out of that regional summit work and looking at the social and emotional screens and kind of understanding where everyone is with wellness. Certainly our students and maybe all of us too, now that we think about it. But I think there might be some proactive work the group can do when they can kind of get out of that response pattern that everybody seems to be in right now.
Okay.
So that'll certainly be something to look forward to. Thank you for that. Another question that did come up regarded an attendance teacher. So a few people had a question like, what is an attendance teacher? So I asked if Chris could speak to that.
Sure. So this would be, we're appointing tonight, or I've asked you to appoint tonight, our 6th attendance teacher. So an attendance teacher is kind of a modern version of a truant officer. It's actually a New York State certified teaching position. The applicants have to apply, get New York State certified teaching position. They go to, their primary function is the home visit, right? So that's their primary function, is to, when students aren't attending, they go to homes. Every day they're traveling to homes. During COVID, sometimes that's delivering a Chromebook and helping kids to log on, make sure they have the passwords. They're doing some tech support too. They bring in community agencies. They come back and meet weekly with guidance counselors. Okay, what are some kids that we need to check on? What are some kids that need support? They coordinate with, I think I already said, they coordinate with outside agencies that can get students and families support. So they very much function as a arm of the school out in the community and work with kids. And their work right now is more vital than ever, going out to schools.
Did you say we have 6? This is our 6th?
We have 6, yes.
So they're like a modern truancy officer, you're saying?
Well,
Yes, we have, so to clarify, we have 1 dedicated to the BOCES. So the newest one is dedicated to the BOCES. The other 5 are itinerant.
Yeah.
Right? So they're itinerant, they work for districts.
See, back in the day in Remsen, we had Mr. Nicotera and Mrs. Turner. They were the truancy officers. They'd go to your house and find out where you're at.
and it really,
We're doing that too.
the idea really was less, it's not so much or that punitive effort, more about trying to get the kids connected and engaged and work with them and the families to come on board to school.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing on this thing is it says he's working towards certification.
Yeah, there's no one certified in this area. So every time there are certain qualifications you have to have. You have to have a bachelor's degree. You have to be eligible for the certification. So in order for us to hire you, you have to be eligible, but nobody has this. None of the 5 that we hired so far have had the certification. So then it's just a matter of applying for it. As soon as, they just apply to the state, they pay the fee. I believe this candidate has already met all the criteria. He just had to file, send it in, and pay the fee for the certification.
To get certified, they have to have done the work to some degree, and I think that's probably part of it.
Yeah, we actually,
right. I mean,
if they are certified, we can't hire somebody who's not certified.
Right.
But
right.
in every one of these situations, every candidate has not been certified. So,
But the other thing on this is that the salary is $41,000 or $42,000 starting salary. It's higher than a lot of certified teachers are starting, right?
That's step 1. That's our first. That's our base salary.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that, because I've always thought starting teacher salary was too low.
Right.
But it just feels like this guy is coming out of a job bagging groceries and going into a $41,000 job.
Agree. Yeah.
Looking at his work history here, there's not much there.
Yeah.
He's got substitute teacher experience and then experience working with community agencies, I believe.
He worked for the DSO as a direct support assistant. That's pretty low.
Do we talk about this in open session? Individual people's, is this appropriate?
Or I don't know.
Well, it brings up some relevant points about the role of that teacher.
I don't care about the guy. Yeah, I'm asking about the position.
So when we think of the role of that position, it's that ability to connect. So why would we want a direct support provider or someone in that connection role? Well, when we think about the significant experience one gains in that environment, working with someone with intensive needs, creating that connection with that individual and supporting them, that's the same kind of spirit and attitude we want people to have in the role of an attendance teacher. We want them knocking on doors and engaging families. The work is incredibly challenging. You might imagine that some doors that are knocked on, people don't want to open. And we're experiencing that regularly. So our attendance teachers are driving down and knocking on doors, knowing people are there, and we can't get kids to connect, right? So they're not answering. Sometimes there are language barriers. There's a lot of trauma and fear. Sometimes people's home lives are not great, and they're worried about DSS. They might be worried about immigration. They might be worried about law enforcement. So they're very reluctant to open doors and let people in. And we want the attendance teachers to establish relationships with the children and the families. And that works out really well, especially when we have attendance teachers who are in one of the component districts in an itinerant capacity, then connecting sometimes with our counselors up on campus with some kids who are now transitioning into alt ed, which does happen. So there's a great opportunity there for relationship building, and it does take a measure of courage, right? So when we talk about doing home visits, we don't just send anybody out to do that. There's a measure of courage that has to go with that too. And I think that in some people's previous work experiences, they find those opportunities to not only make connections and provide support, but also to flex a little courage. So I certainly look forward to welcoming the other attendance teacher and continuing to see that support the schools, because especially now as kids are remote, we need those.
No, this is a question of supply and demand also. It's a difficult position to fill. And when you have a difficult position to fill, you have to do what you have to do to get the best person you can and for that position.
Correct.
So then they'll become certified and we'll be okay.
If you've been on the higher end of situations, sometimes you get 5 or 6 resumes and you got to pick the best one you can. You got to fill the position eventually. So.
Yeah. Well, one of the big things was, the salary for the job of a non-certified person. If it's step 1, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
And
supply and demand again.
I'm glad to see step 1 is $42,000.
Wonderful.
Nice. Okay, so is that our discussion? Are we ready to, I think we need we had a motion, we had discussion. I think we need to, all in favor, say aye to approve this consent agenda, correct?
Correct.
So I need all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstained? Okay, motion carries. All right, Dr. Kilburn, looks like we're on to topic 8, which is board topics and discussion items. So, and that looks like my name's next to that. So that's me. So, all right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we had a nice officers meeting last week, and we covered a lot of ground and territory. And I'm trying to make sure I hit all my high notes. So if I miss things, please, Dr. Kilburn and Russ, please jump in. But one of the things we wanted to address is I want to get some of the board's feelings on how we want to follow up on some of our board retreat items. This is, we covered a lot of good ground. We had a good board retreat, and we really did do some meaningful work and uncover some of what we thought our priorities to be. But we need to keep moving this forward so it doesn't die on the vine. So I kind of want to open up a little bit to my fellow board members and ask you, how would you like to proceed on some of these items? And that's the first item we wanted to top.
So to clarify, I think, Steve, what we had talked about, and correct me if I'm wrong, was we had left with some 3 big ideas. The idea of BOCES as the helping hand, BOCES as a central connection, and BOCES focused on equity. And then could we look at goal development as a result of that? And our administrative team can go back and flesh out potential organizational goals and bring them back to the board. And we can do that in a meeting, or you might prefer to do that in retreat. And then after the organizational goals are adopted, then the board has to really discuss and set its own board goals. Again, you could take opportunities within meetings, or you could choose to do that in retreat. And I think, Steve, is that where you were going with that?
Yeah, I remember because we talked about, I have notes written all over my sheets here, and I know that we wanted to follow up on those organizational goals or board goals for sure. So with that, I'll open it up to anybody that would like to jump in and provide some feedback on what they would hope to see happen next.
I think you said actually what could happen if you fish it out. We have some goals, some organizational goals, some topics that the board identified that we should be working on as an organization.
Right.
Those would be flushed out, but then we have to look at those in terms of the board and what are the goals that the board should put in place to support the organizational goals. And I think we need to get the organizational goal first, approve it, say that we're going to go along with it. Then we can meet as a board and say, what are the specific things as a board that we need to do? Do we need to have a committee? Do we need to ask for information? Do we need to, what do we need to do? Where do we need to be proactive to be sure that the organization does this? Do we have a timeline when they report back? And that's the way I see it. I don't think it's difficult. I think it's the case of once we get those goals based on what we've identified, then we as a board have to say, how do we put our teeth into this and see that it happens and feel satisfied that it's happening? Or if it can't happen, then you kind of adjust where you have to go. So I would say that would be the process.
So organizational goals first, and we have the good doctor and the senior staff and the whole team go and really ferret out the organizational goals, and then we'll have an additional meetings or retreat. We have to decide how you folks want to communicate to really spend some time working on board goals that'll support the organizational goals.
Steve?
What do you see time-wise as far as this is concerned with your staff? How long before they could perhaps come back to us so we could begin our work?
I think it's reasonable that we could propose organizational goals to the board at the March meeting. And then the board could, and that again, if you're comfortable doing that in the meeting, we could present the goals in the meeting. You'd have time to decide how you feel about them. If you think there should be modifications or not, we can possibly even adopt that night or go back with revisions per the board's direction. So feasibly, if we're able to have that completed at the March meeting or March, April, you could start your work as board, either in April or May on your goals.
That would be all set to go by the new school year.
That's good. Now, Mr. Nicotera, I think, wanted to make a comment.
Sure, Steve, thank you. I think tonight we saw evidence of the administration taking one of the goals that we talked about at the retreat, and that was leading the way. I'm one of the board members that still sits in our local board, and we firmly believe that when we get back to school and things get back to normal and testing becomes testing again and academics is the focus, the floodgates are going to open by districts looking to BOCES for support, for help, for programs. And I think as Chris and Scott and everyone, Tom presented tonight, that's a proactive approach. They're looking ahead for us because right now we're looking to just open the doors of school and maybe stay open for a period of time now. But when classification of students comes up, credit recovery, academic gaps, equity, when those issues begin to really hit home, I mean, we don't know at Sequoia where we're going to go. We're going to look to BOCES. And I think the administration has put together a template in a proactive way, looking ahead, saying, okay, what other districts are going to need? And rather than just create a program when the time comes, there's programs in the budget anticipating what our needs are going to be. So, I want to commend them, but I think the philosophy that we talked about at our retreat is already in place and beginning to see that right now.
Right, exactly. Thank you. Any other board members want to weigh in too? This is we're heading in the right direction here.
I'm just waiting to see if anybody else wants to talk.
You have the mic, Mr. Russ.
And Tony, agree with you 100%. And as I said, to the administrative team, setting those four areas, that's exactly where we were. But Anthony, Tony, you know just as well as I do that the finances are getting tougher and tougher. And I think the next 3 years within districts, and I think Tom Dorr hit it right on the head, that $9 billion of federal money that's in the state budget is not going to be there next year. So this year is going to be difficult, but the next two are going to be horrific for local districts. And somewhere we need to talk about BOCES thinking outside the box. And I'm going to say it again, and I know I get beat up, but that's fine. I can take a punch. It's we got to start looking. Tony, you and I are neighbors. You have programs that I can send my kids to that I simply can't afford. And I have programs that the Madison School District, which is 9 miles away from me, can share. And Ms. Corbin, you know where I'm going with Brookfield, right? I mean, we really need to start talk about regionalization and having that the building that's in New Hartford is not the identification of BOCES anymore. It's the teachers coming into the school districts where there's 3 different school mates, students sitting in that classroom where we can get aid back on that teacher. And that's going to save us money in hiring teachers and everything else. I know the unions are not going to be happy. I know a lot of people not going to be happy, but this is survival as far as financial. 2008 crippled us. The gap elimination adjustment crippled us. And now they have a new term that they're going to hold money back on us. And it's only going to continue down the road. And I just want to make sure that BOCES leads the discussion in regard to regionalization and how we can help the districts. So somewhere in this process, I want to have that discussion, but I would like to have it with my peers on this board before we go out. Because I know I've talked about it, and I at one of the last SBI meetings, and I got my butt kicked pretty good, you know, by a couple of the school districts who identify regionalization as losing their high school or a merger. So there's an educational gap there where regionalization actually means, because we do it with sports. Hamilton kids come to my school to play football. I sent our hockey players to Clinton. BOCES is regionalization. I send my kids to you. You know, they're out of the high school.
So Russ, let me ask you a question too. Do you think this could be part of our certainly our board goals? I don't know. I mean, something is forward, you know, you're going forward thinking regionalizations, you know, there's some great opportunities and it's going to be a necessity. It's coming our way, whether we want it to be there or not. It's a matter of whether we control our destiny or we sit on the sidelines and just wait for things to happen to us. But I think maybe we could add that to some of our board goals, because maybe it's too soon for organizational goals because we're not quite there yet. And maybe we can give more direction and get more input from the superintendents. And, you know, you made some great examples on our last call about, you know, maybe instead of sending people to a building in Middle Settlement Road, you're sending teachers out to regional spots, and 3 or 4 schools are meeting there to meet that BOCES teacher. And maybe BOCES goes to the school districts don't come to BOCES.
Well, you know, though, with this organizational goals, that of regionalizing should come from that. That should move itself out of that as a topic that perhaps we take on as a board and see how do we begin the education and get information from it. Because through the organization, that's where we're going to have to go.
Right.
We're going to have to be the leaders in that area.
Right.
So
Mr. Boucher.
a topic.
I'd like to make a little point.
Oh,
that we want to move towards real regionalization because we think we need the efficiency, not because we like regionalization. It's
Yeah.
going to be a hard sell, that
Yeah.
term.
Right.
So just mindful, your goal here is not regionalization. That's just a method.
Change the verbiage. You're right, Mike.
So Russ, it's Michelle here. Oh, Gary, go ahead. You were trying. Go ahead.
all right, Gary Porcelli.
I just wanted to point out, I don't disagree with anything that's been said so far, but maybe in ringing the bell of reality, we've tried since I've been on the board, and that's about 10 years now, to even get a common bell schedule. And we haven't been able to affect that. So I just, I don't want us to get into a situation where we overreach.
Well, and that's a valid point, Gary. But that can't, we have to work that out. I mean, we have to take that step forward and say that the common bell schedule needs to benefit kids and not districts. Okay. And there's going to be some hard conversations, but anytime you shift a paradigm, it's hard conversations, but that's leadership. We're not afraid to walk that road and say, you know what, we're going to meet this head on. It's a reality, and union contracts are going to be an issue too. But again, and somebody said it at the beginning of the meeting that we base our decisions on what's good for kids. And so when we put it in that perspective, this is the right road. And Michael, I love your idea. Maybe it's not regionalization, but maybe it's a different word or a different concept to put people at ease. But that's the discussion that I would like to see with this board first, that we find some common ground. Michelle, I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you didn't cut me off. I was just trying to support your thoughts there in the sense that we currently, we're not busing students to other buildings, but we do the distance learning with Chinese and some other content areas. And there are programs, Russ, that I'm in awe of over there in Waterville, your FFA programs and whatnot, that, instead of saying we have to bus these kids around, perhaps we're just moving staff. And I agree with you 100% that the unions are a tough group to work with, but sometimes in tough times you can find a way to come together. So to your point, it would be interesting to see if we could start some programming, distance learning style, or have the teachers rotate in a content area, just sort of get our feet wet with that,
And I love this conversation. And this is, as long as we keep on talking about this, we will meet the goal. But somewhere in the process, it's got to get on paper, and we got to be courageous enough, to say, this is what's coming down the road. And a lot of new board members, this is a veteran staff. I mean, take how many years of board membership is sitting with these 12 board members. But we have a lot of new school board members who really didn't go through 2008, who didn't go through the first Governor Cuomo's losing money in the middle of a school year, and how you dealt with that. And the number of people that we laid off in 2008, we never got back again. And a lot of that is in the first people we lay off, social workers, because no contract, right? So, but I love the discussion, Steve, and I don't know how you can fit it in, but it looks like it's
Boucher.
Yes.
Mr. Boucher.
Yes, Dr. Porcelli.
Following up with what Russ suggests, and again, I think the board members collectively have expressed a good idea. Is it conceivable that the president might appoint a smaller group of us, like a task force, to just kind of flesh things out, get some pros and cons, so that the full board would have some meat to discuss as to where we could go and what's possible and what's not and where the obstacles are? A smaller group might be able to have more facility with communication rather than the 12 of us sitting around trying to interrupt each other and talk about this.
Sure. Well, I think that idea has some merit. Thank you for that. And, I can consult with Dr. Kilburn and find out how we can get a smaller group together and start digging up some data, because it's a conversation worth having. We have to do it. It's the time is here. Unfortunately, it seems like crises always force the hand of change. But nobody likes change. My wife had a little article on her desk all the time from Scott Adams, who wrote the comic Dilbert. He says, change is good. You go first. So, I mean,
I think there is an opportunity, certainly in our next officers meeting too, to talk about maybe bringing before the board an opportunity for board members who are interested to look at some committee work. And I would certainly recommend that Chris and Scott, our senior council members, have an opportunity to be a part of that, to help with the research and looking at that. We hear those words regionalization and it sounds really scary, but you're part of a BOCES. P-TECH in essence is a regional high school. And so is MSA, right? And look at the virtual academy. That's a regional elementary school online. And sometimes these things can be threatening, and sometimes crisis can bring out the best in us too. And we begin to see that there aren't as many barriers as maybe we thought there was. So I think the board's interest is well served, and you never know, you might be helping forecast as a lighthouse a need that other people will start to realize. To Tony's point, when those doors open next year, I think people are going to start to see that, oh wow, we have a lot to do and money's getting tighter.
Right, absolutely.
I just a really cool question. Is there any talk of us getting back together in person?
Yes. So I did reach out. I always ask the officers, how do you want to move forward? I'm kind of hoping that as people are starting to get vaccinated, we might be able to start moving into the in-person world. And we're certainly willing to accommodate a March board meeting in person at the pleasure of the board, should they feel comfortable doing so.
Or perhaps even a hybrid one where those of us that would like to come to building do, and those that don't want to do Zoom can do that. Maybe that'd be an option as well.
Do we decide that today?
Yeah, you absolutely can. I'm here. Whatever you want to do, I'll do it. I just need to know.
I mean, I think, well, we're calling, if we put everybody on the spot, maybe somebody may or may not want to say whether they're comfortable. Dr. Kilburn, well, how about if we did say we'll do an in-person meeting, but make it somewhat of a hybrid for those that don't really, they're not ready yet. They're not ready.
I'm going to be in Florida, so it'll have to be hybrid for March.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough. Elaine's hybrid.
That's fine, but
I'm not flying back for one meeting.
Well, we're not going to want to
waited this long.
As long as you don't tell us how good the weather is, that's okay.
No, I'll show you in the background.
No. Better not.
No.
Yes, we can make that accommodation.
Okay.
I don't think that's an issue. We are starting to find, and I certainly won't ask, but we are finding vaccination capacity is starting to increase enough where people are starting to feel a little more comfortable about coming back into some spaces. So let's move forward with that objective. I think that's a good idea. It would be really nice to see each other again, wouldn't it? Like
absolutely.
In a room, even though we'll all be masked, but in a room. Yeah.
Come with our scuba helmets on or something.
So,
I think that was our board topics. I don't want to leave board topics before I give everybody. Did anybody want to make a comment or a point that they didn't get a chance to raise their hand or speak out? I want to make sure I'm respectful to anyone that I don't want to miss anybody if they still have any comments on that topic. Okay.
I'll make one quick.
Good.
On my Zoom, I have this reaction thing where I can do stuff like that.
Yeah.
I like it.
Okay. So I wonder if we can use these reaction things like to raise a hand when we want to get attention. If that's
yeah. Yep.
Well, I mean, to answer your question, Steve, does anybody have anything to say? It would be a way to signal. Well, look at that. And we can all do that. Is just sort of protocol for wanting to inject something.
Sure. Good.
I
always feel bad that. Yeah. in this system that we're working on now, I always feel bad as though we're going to miss somebody. And you almost have to be the loudest voice in the room to be heard. Otherwise, you get left to the side. I want to make sure everybody's included.
So Mike, you gave us all a little bit of fun as I'm watching people put their little icons up.
Well, if there's another way to signal, let's hear it.
No, I think it's a great idea. I think it works well, and it allows us to become more Zoom savvy.
I like it. I like it. Well, good. Thank you, Mike. Anybody else?
Stephen, in terms of getting people recognized and stuff, at the bottom of the screen, there's a thing that says participants, and there's an option where you can raise your hand along with voting and stuff. Might be a way of people being able to gain recognition without interrupting someone.
Okay. Thank you for that. Absolutely.
And does that work? Who sees my hand up?
I see it.
Okay. I don't see. Does anybody else see it?
Yes.
Okay. I don't see it.
You have to be on the screen. I don't see everybody on the top of my screen. I have to move it over to see all of you. So
Right.
Or if you're not on my screen at this moment and you got your hand up, I can't see it.
Gotcha.
All right.
Gotcha. Okay, very good. And we got some technology in here. How about that, Scott Morris?
Or you can always just shout.
Well, good. Thank you, Michael.
Old way.
All right, so now we move on to old business, and it appears as though we have no old business. And then lastly, we need to go into an executive session for the purpose of, where's my note here? Where's my note? Thought I had it X'd off here.
Yeah, it's the first box.
Oh, sorry. Discussing employment history of a particular person. So, Dr. Kilburn, who do we need to stay present in our side meeting, executive session?
Well, we need all the board members and myself, and I'm just going to ask if Mr. Morris and Deb Kimball can hang out in the world to get us back out of this room at some point. If Scott, you can put me in a breakout room with the board, and for Chris and Tom Dorr and Ann Turner, I do not believe we will be reconvening. So I think you're good to go. And thank you so much for all of your input tonight.
Excuse
Deb.
me. I'm
Yes.
sorry, Mr. Boucher, could we have a motion, please?
We get a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Moved by Mr.
Second.
Second by Dr. Porcelli, I think. And okay, we're in executive session. Is everybody back?
Not yet. We have
Be here in a couple seconds.
Mr. Moore had to leave.
Yes.
And I think he left, it's 6:48 now. I would say he probably left at 6:43, Deb, if you need to make a record of that.
Thank you, Dr. Kilburn.
You're very welcome. That's everyone back.
Okay. So since everybody's back, I think the only thing we have left to do is to get a motion for adjournment, correct? So can I get a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Charlene.
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Salerno. All right, everybody, that's a wrap. Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Thank you,
Charlene,
everyone.
much happiness to you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Charlene.
Yeah, take care.
Marlene,
Bye,
take
dear.
care of yourself. Stay in touch.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.